Christy, before we begin with our topic at hand, please tell me a little bit about yourself.
All right. I am Christy Davin. I am Senior Director of Marketing and Operations here. I have a background in education and a background in the corporate world, and the two of them sort of wrapped together to bring me full circle back into the corporate side of an education business, I guess is how you would put it. I have an English degree from Denison University, and I have a bachelor's, excuse me, and I have a master's in education from Lesley College.
So, for our listeners and viewers at home who are not familiar, where is Denison?
Denison is in Ohio, a very small town called Granville. It was founded by a New England guy, so it was very New Englandy town, little college on a hill with the chapels and the ivy and all of that. Um, I actually was lucky enough to fit very well there, although I didn't actually see it before I accepted.
I'm actually not surprised. I did the same thing with the school I went to.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Denison, I didn't. It may be like this for you as well, undergraduate. They just assign you an academic advisor randomly because they don't really know what you're going to major in yet, right?
Right.
So my academic advisor was the dance department head. And as I said to Nikhil earlier, I said, you may not know this about looking at me. I'm not a dancer.
Oh.
Not. I can't run and I can't dance. Just not built that way. So she was lovely and a very nice person, but I switched majors sophomore year to English. And I'm not sure if I'm the one who's supposed to be steering us in this direction, but English became my major because it was something I was good at.
Okay.
It was something that I knew that I could get good grades at which I could get good grades. Uh, that's ironic that I had to change, fix my grammar. I could do well as an English major without a lot of extra effort. And I didn't know exactly what that was going to lead me to. You know, you don't become an English major to get a job in English when you graduate. You know, it's
Right.
not like a biology major or a chemistry major or communications major, something like that.
Right.
But I found that it was something that I could enjoy. At Denison, they had a great English department with really interesting classes, not only on the structure and history of the language itself, but also on literature like Native American women writers and risen and fallen women in fiction.
Mm.
And I have really great professors who made it engaging and were wonderful in helping you sort of apply it to your life and your world and write about it and analyze it. And it was also a great way to get to know your classmates because you would get into these really deep conversations. And we'll always remember Richard Krause, who was one of my professors, who was my teacher for both creative writing and narrative writing. He was the one who always taught me that if you're going to use a gun in scene 3, you got to introduce the fact that the gun exists in scene 1.
Chekhov's gun.
Yeah. So it was fascinating time for me, but I didn't worry too much about how I was going to apply after graduation. My father, who was very successful in the finance world, went to Bowdoin, and he was a German major.
Mm.
And he said, I took German because I enjoyed it and because I knew I could be good at it and get good grades at it. And I didn't really worry about how to apply it after graduation. Now that was in the 60s, I guess, and he didn't. It was different then. Um, Back then, you dressed in your best suit and you had your resume in your hand and you went knocking on a bunch of doors and you introduced yourself in person, and you had the benefit of that personal interaction right away. And nowadays, it's a little bit different. As a hiring manager, I'm learning that the cover letter becomes very important because you don't have that personal interaction right away. You have to impress them and introduce yourself with the written word. And so not only does the English major come into play that way, but it also shows the need for uh, explaining the relevance of your education and experience. So my father didn't have to explain how his degree in German could be relevant to his finance job.
He could use his personality and
Exactly.
his likability to impress someone and get into a field
Exactly.
that way, because that was the 60s.
Right.
That whole Mad Men sort of
Exactly.
environment.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So while it's clearly true that using the English major to write the cover letter and express yourself in a way that a hiring manager would take note of you is important. That doesn't necessarily explain how you went from English major to hiring manager. So tell us a little bit more
That's
about your,
true.
your journey.
Sure. Okay. So after declaring as an English major, I decided I wanted to be a teacher, and I'd always wanted to be a teacher. Um, Denison did not have well, they did have a teaching department, but it was not something that I could get certified for there. There was still the practicum, the student teaching that needed to be done and everything. So after graduation, I went right into graduate school at Lesley University, excuse me. And I had one of those harrowing years where I did my student teaching, took 6 hours of classes a day, and worked part time as a waitress so that I could sort of, contribute. I moved back with my family for the year and consolidated the entire thing. The regulations for a teaching degree have changed a little bit, but at the time I could get the master's in 14 months. So there was that one harrowing year where doing all of that, it was totally worth it, 1 year of crazy. And then I had my master's. The problem with the master's at that time, which was the mid 90s, is that there were no teaching jobs to be had. I did what my father would have done, or in Mad Men, I put on my best suit and I took a pile of resumes and I visited school after school after school and tried to let my personality speak for me when my resume hadn't, unfortunately, nothing really unique about it. I got good grades in college, I had a master's, but there was nothing about me. I wasn't bilingual, I didn't have a specialization like special needs or anything like that. So I had a really hard time getting in the door at a school. And so the practical aspects of that situation meant that I needed to go get a job. It wasn't the job that I thought I wanted right then. And I want to stress that thought I wanted right then. But I got a job. And I did multiple jobs at that time. I worked with learning disabled college kids at Mount Ida College while I worked part time as an office manager. And then I moved into other jobs. I've had part time jobs as accounts payable at a car dealership. I have done lots of different things. And the beauty of that, about having to take a job, even if it wasn't what you thought was the job, is that I learned what I actually liked that was not immediately what I thought I wanted to do. Thought I wanted to be an elementary school teacher. My dream was to be a third grade teacher, fourth grade teacher. But all of these other experiences taught me a little bit about other skills that I had. So those part-time ones were fine while I had an apartment and fewer expenses, but eventually you want to buy a house, you want to get married. So I found a full-time job in marketing, in food service industry actually. So working with companies like Tyson and McCain, getting food to restaurants. And I was the marketing manager. So I dealt with trade shows and communications and flyers and marketing programs, that kind of thing. And I was actually in the food business for 16 years.
Ooh.
And by the time that was done, I was a national communications manager for a national company instead of marketing manager for a small local company. And I learned a lot about things like branding and communications. And I found the more that I spent time in the corporate world, the more I learned that my English, my skills with the English language were really valuable, because I'm learning more and more, unfortunately, that people do not know how to properly communicate. Grammar and things like apostrophes, things like effective use of action words. When I drive home, there's this place that does window repair, and their sign says, "We do window repair," and I want to go in there and say, "No, you repair windows," and it's just effective writing in that way, being able to get your message across as simply and as effectively as possible, so that you're not repeating the same action word over and over again. This is a lesson that we all learn when we write our resume. You don't want to use the same action word time and time again, right. And it's the same thing in a paragraph. So anyway, the corporate world needed that from me. They needed my CEO of this multi-million dollar, 36,000 employee company still couldn't write a proper letter. He couldn't write his annual speech. He couldn't write those things. And so I became a valuable resource for them with what he wanted to say, whether it was in writing or even on, an annual town hall meetings, which we would do via podcast or via like Skype kind of thing,
Mhm.
because 36,000 people all over the country. And he would come to me, and I would be his voice. I was his ghostwriter. I was his resource, and that was great. Except I didn't. I found out one more thing about myself, was that I didn't want to work for a giant corporation. I
Mm.
didn't like being a numerical number. A numerical employee known by that number. I wanted to be Christy. I wanted to be somebody who was part of a smaller, more entrepreneurial spirit. And so I found this opportunity with Triton. So now I have the opportunity to work with people like yourself, people like Nikhil, and all these other educators who are passionate, really love what they do, want the kids to be successful, want the kids to understand what that means and the opportunities that are available to them. And they want to see students own the opportunities, and I don't want to speak for you, but when I graduated from high school, college was an assumption, and it doesn't really matter where you go, but you got to go.
Right.
And I don't really care what you do when you get there, but you got to go. And I think that one of the things that we're trying to do here is to help kids understand that there is that opportunity, and that it is an opportunity. It's not just the
Right.
next thing on the checklist.
Right. I know what you mean. One of the big things that I like to talk about with my students is finding the right place for yourself, but also finding the right place with yourself within a school. Like you said, and what the advice your dad gave was great. Study what you love. You're going to find your place anyway. I actually had very different advice from my dad. And if you don't mind my telling the
No,
story,
please.
when I was a sophomore in high school, my dad walked up to me one day and he said, "I've got it all worked out. I've got it all planned out. You're all set. I just got off the phone with my buddy Matty." And it turns out his buddy Matty was a friend of his from law school, who also happened to be the Honorable Matthew Ronaldo, congressman for our district, for the United States congressman for the state of New Jersey. They just happened to be friends, and he was going to get a letter from him, and they were going to send me to West Point. Me. With the marching and the uniforms, and I looked at him and I was like, "What?"
Was your dad a military man?
He had volunteered to serve in World War II. He was a World War II vet,
Okay.
honorably discharged, highly decorated bomber pilot. Very proud of his service, but he was not a career military man. But he had decided that that was the best way for me to achieve his goals for me, which was to go to college for free, because West Point, like most military academies in the United States, is free. And then they will send you to law school for free. They'll pay for it. At least they did at the time in the late 80s, early 90s. And then you owe them minimum 6 years of service. And of course, since you're an officer and a lawyer, that would keep me out of the trenches, not carrying a rifle through some country with jungle or desert, which is my dad wanted me to avoid. That's why he volunteered instead of getting drafted for World War II, because he wanted to avoid crawling through mud. Even though he got 2 Purple Hearts, he still found flying a bomber plane slowly over Germany safer than crawling through mud. And then after that, he knew exactly which judges I was going to apply to get clerkships, which states I was going to take the bar in, when I was going to be a judge. And he had it all planned out. The only problem was I didn't want to do any of that. I was interested in something completely different. And when I went to college, I took a major that is universally acknowledged as even more useless than an English major. I did a theater major. I also double majored in history, which also is not a major that's designed to get you a job.
Unless you want to be a history teacher.
Unless you want to be a history teacher, or try and go through the trouble of getting a PhD and being a history scholar, which is even a smaller field. And he was okay with the history major and the theater major at first, because for him, those were still paths to pre-law. Like, his idea was, even with those majors, I could be a trial lawyer.
Okay.
You know, the theater would be helpful that way.
Okay.
And he had this hope, this dream for me that
I love how he adapted your goals into the eventuality of reaching his own for you, though.
very supportive the whole way. Came to see
Awesome.
every play I acted in or directed in college. And when I graduated, I surprised everybody, including myself, by getting a job in theater right out of undergrad, which is weird because, again, it's a major you're not supposed to get a job with that major. And I got a job in the student life department at a community college where I worked in student life and taught a class a semester and then worked with the performing arts community on campus to produce and direct plays. So that turned into, through a roundabout way, a career in teaching math. That's what I ended up. That's what I technically am right now. I'm a certified math teacher, and it was that following that theater job and teaching jobs in theater that led me to a place that was a company that in Los Angeles was a subcontractor with the Los Angeles Unified School District, where they supplied teachers for a school district that didn't have the funds to pay the benefits for teachers, for new teachers. So instead of hiring new teachers as real full-time teachers, they subcontracted with companies like the one I worked for, who provided teachers. And I had gone in to be an English or a history teacher, and they made me take a test, and I actually scored over the threshold for math. And they said, okay, you're teaching algebra and geometry starting in 2 weeks. Relearn it.
No pressure.
No pressure, none whatsoever. So I had to reteach myself Algebra 1, Geometry, and eventually Algebra 2. And I taught off and on in Los Angeles public high schools and with other programs with this company, part-time mostly, for the next several years, until finally my wife and I decided we wanted to have kids, so one or more of us needed benefits. So I ended up going into management and becoming a manager of a team of 50 tutors and in-home and in-school teachers. And that's what led me kind of forward in the what I like to call supplemental education business.
Mm-hmm.
You know, managing tutors, managing tutoring centers like competitors for us, like a Sylvan or a tutoring club, places like that. And that led me here. And it's not at all where I started out when I first went to college. Like the theater major got me here, and I'm not sure how that happened. Like I just said it, and I still don't understand it.
Well, it's really interesting that our stories are so similar, that we went to college for something that is now vaguely relevant to what we're doing, but it was that journey through multiple steps
Right.
that got us to where we are now.
Yes. Yes. So it's hard to have that argument, but being honest and saying, you know, I'm interested in this. I'm interested in this type of career, and I'm interested in this type of major. I think they can have the conversation we're having, which is you can get a job out of college with an English major. You can get a job out of college with a history major.
Mm-hmm.
You can get a job out of college with a theater major. Theater, for me, was the perfect place to learn about running a classroom. When you're directing a play and you're working with actors, especially actors of different levels of experience, that's very similar to managing a classroom. All of my classroom management experience came not from my Master's of Education degree that I had received much later in life after I'd been a teacher for 10, 12 years. I didn't do a Master's of Education right away like you did. I did it much later.
Mm-hmm.
It came from directing plays. So that was very informative for me. Doing theater, learning how to break down scripts, taught me how to teach English classes, taught me how to do math problems, how to break down a math problem. That, for me, I never took math in college. I didn't get a master's in math. I don't have a formal math education. It's all self-taught. But my ability to teach math comes out of my ability to break down a script and break things down into their composite parts that I learned in theater history, theater literature, directing class, acting class. That's what makes me, in my opinion, the math teacher I am today. And you can get a job with that. And having that conversation is, I think, the first step. Telling your parents, no, mom and dad, I don't want to be a doctor like you want me to be. I don't want to be a lawyer like you want me to be, although that's great. I want to, be an anthropologist and live with the tribes people in this country across the world and learn about that and write about that and be an advocate for them. And I want to take major in Swahili in college. Well, there are jobs there.
Or I don't know what I want to do yet, but I'm pretty sure it's not that.
Right.
My uncle my uncle went to Dartmouth, and he was a teacher, a college professor and a high school teacher for a long time. I think he taught at some of the private schools in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
When I told him that I was getting a master's in education, he was furious. He was furious because he said the only way to know how to be a teacher is to be a teacher. You have to teach to know how to be a teacher.
Right.
And what he didn't understand is that the rules had changed a little bit, and you now needed a certification and a
Right.
and or a degree. But it was an attack. I felt, my uncle was
Right.
very outspoken and very strong-willed, and it was really hard for me to stand up to that. But I felt stronger for the decision I had made once I was
Right.
able to voice the defense for that choice that I
And
made.
it's not that he was wrong. I mean, he's right. The only way to learn how to teach is to teach. But on the other hand, he was wrong in the sense that you were right in that you needed those steps by law in whatever state you were in. So I think communicate, you've got to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got to be able to understand that not everything is going to line up perfectly right away. That if you pick a major or a path that you're not sure about, but you're going to enjoy, you're
Yeah.
not sure where it might lead, but you're going to enjoy it and you're going to
Right.
be good at it, it'll lead somewhere.
Right. I mean, my goal to be a teacher was not my primary goal. I mean, I went into theater and eventually did some film work because that's where I was leaning at first. And attempting and having some successes and quite a few failures. The world of theater and film is a lot of rejection. And a lack of a paycheck led me to teaching more and more, and making that more and more of my professional income earning life. And while so now I'm still involved in that, I'm making a podcast and directing short plays at a local theater, but that's not my primary income right now. My primary income right now is teaching. So, and that's great because I love doing it, and it is very similar to what I've always wanted to do. So, a happy, good path is not necessarily. Oftentimes, you don't end up where you thought you were going to, but it's still a place where you're happy to be. I think.
Yep. If you're always making choices that, one of the people that I hired, and I said, hopefully what we'll do is we will find you a job that you like a lot of, but maybe not all of, and then, in a year we'll take, well, what do you want to do more of, and we'll move into more of what you want to do and less of what you don't want to do. And I talk to my kids about that as well. As you grow older, you'll make more choices, hopefully, that will give you more of what you want and less of what you don't want. So hopefully you do find the job.
Right.
But in the meantime, you are gradually getting yourself into a place where you're as happy as you can be, and whether or not it's where you thought you were going to end up.
Well, Christy, thank you so much. This has been a enlightening conversation. I've had a lot of fun.
Jason, anytime.
So